Thank you for joining me today. I really was looking forward to seeing your smile for above all things.
Much as it is.
So as a medical doctor, you have struck me because you have a particular way about you, which I'm sure I'm not the first person to say. You tend to see your patients as more of a whole person, and that's even on your website. And so you see people from the inside out, and you have something that seems to me that's beyond empathy, and it's more of an intuition that you use in your approach. I don't know if you agree, but that's what I felt. And it feels like when you're meeting with the patient, you're not just like a detective coldly going through the symptoms. You're actually looking for the ways that people tick and how what's going on with them in all aspects might contribute to how they're like misfiring or off track in whatever way. That comes through very strongly. And I've never felt that kind of energy from a doctor before, from a medical doctor. So then I started looking around your office and I noticed some of the pictures and I saw that and I knew already your connection to yoga. So I imagine you've healed thousands of people over the years. And,
Just to tell you, once I had a medical student and he said, how many patients have you seen anyway? And so I thought about it. I multiplied it out through the years. I've seen enough people to fill Yankee Stadium.
Wow, you've done the calculation.
More, there would be standing room only.
Wouldn't it be cool to get them all together and actually put them in there? And
Oh, what they have to say. It would not be one opinion, you can't help it.
But the way that you work and your whole approach of getting to the root of the issue and looking at the holistic person is, I think, something that is making a huge difference for me, and it's adding so much value to the world. It's not common practice, and I just am struck by it. And I think that just knowing your connection to yoga, it makes sense because obviously that's also the philosophy of yoga and the spiritual practice. And so it's just so interesting to see who you are as a person and how it all has come together for you holistically. So give us a little snapshot of exactly who you are and how you see yourself right now in this present moment, this time.
Right now, to tell you the truth, I'm really sublimely happy. I'm really very happy. Things are going along well. I won't say I'm satisfied, but I'm happy with what I'm doing. Very busy. And all of the projects I'm involved in are self-inflicted. I've done it all, things I want to do. And I don't want to quit. I like what I do. I mean, most of my friends are either they passed away or they're retired. They're in California or Costa Rica or France, and they're having a great time, I'm sure. I wouldn't have a great time doing that. I feel, right or wrong, that I'm at the peak of my practice. I know more and I feel more, as you say, you call it intuition, je ne sais quoi, the stuff you can't explain. I'm good at that now. And I think it would be, I got what I want out of medicine in a way that's true. I got the confidence that I needed. I got the sort of salute that I'm okay, I'm good at what I do, but now it's my turn to give back. That's the way I feel.
And that comes through very strongly. Your energy comes through very strongly in that way. I think happiness does that and allows a resonance in the person to come across. So I love being able to feel that. And that is such a benefit to your patients because most doctors aren't in that same place. And that maybe that comes with the years and the experience. But
when I see patients, I said, I did this, decades ago. I said, I want to see one patient an hour. And it's partially, my own weakness. I don't think I'd be very good at shifting. Now we see this one, now we see this one. I don't think I'd be really good at that. I don't know, but I'm not going to do it. It's too transactional. I want something to happen. And as I said, it's partly playing to my own strengths, but it's also, I think, very good for the person I'm seeing.
Absolutely. That's a strength, not a weakness.
It's a good alchemy.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think that if a bit doctor were seeing 100 patients in a day and is able to truly reach only 2 of them, and you're seeing 5 patients in a day and can truly reach all 5.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
that's better odds.
They don't need to be reached. They need their eyes checked. It depends on what you're doing too.
Yes, that's true. So it'll be interesting to explore how you got to where you are. So let's go back and talk about baby Dr. Fishman, baby Loren.
Well, you know, it's
And
funny. I have an early memory. I really do. And I know it's right. I was about 3 and I had a little train. I was playing with the train. And here's what's remarkable. I was very happy. And I said to myself, how will I remember this day? Nothing special happened except that.
wow,
I said, how will I remember? And we lived in an apartment, and I went downstairs, and outside there was an empty lot across the street, across the alley. And I dug a hole. I took one of my favorite cars on that electric train and I buried it. And I said, when I bury this car, I think I'll remember that. And sure enough, here I am at age 82, only 79 years later, and I can remember it. So it was a wise thing for a little kid to do who wanted to remember that day. I don't even know if I'd remember that apartment we lived in if it weren't for that. But that's my first memory. And when I was a little kid, my friends all said, Loren, you should be a doctor. You know, I don't know why they said it. I really didn't know. I just thought, well, I like people and I'm rational, and that's why. But one of my early memories, I was still living in that apartment, so I must have been about 6 or 7. My birthday's coming up on Monday, November. This is the autumn. And I remember me and my friends coming home from school and we're going to have a party at our house. And the kids are running around stamping on the fallen leaves and loving it. And I'm looking at them and I'm saying, they're only children. They're just children. As though, you know, it is. And what I said to myself is, it isn't fair. They're only children. You know, I guess I've always felt I was about 60 years old when I was a kid. I just felt like I was 60. And I played basketball, football, and hockey, and tennis, and everything else. And I think I was a pretty normal kid, but I felt much older. I could go and be younger, but really in here, I was a lot older. And in school, I wasn't a particularly good student until I got to high school. My father did this wonderful thing. I mean, I was a little bit of a hoodlum, actually. I was running around with a bunch of boys, one of whom had a bullet in his jaw because he robbed a store.
you're in New York
This is
City?
Chicago. I'm from
Oh, okay.
Chicago. And they were a tough crowd. My father didn't like that very much. And he said, I don't want you to see these guys anymore. And I said, Dad, it's a free country. You can't tell me who my friends are. And he said, I can and I am. So I said, well, okay. And I went upstairs, because now we lived in a nice house. And I opened the window. It was raining. And I packed a duffel bag with a couple pairs of underpants and things like that, threw them out the window into the rain, went down in the basement, started my elaborate electric train, which made a lot of noise, and stole out the back door of the basement to Canada and freedom. And I went by one of my friend's house who had, I didn't know this till I got there. He had written a nasty anonymous letter to one of his teachers in school. We were 12. And somehow the teacher found out he wrote the letter. So he was in for it tomorrow. And he had just had his bar mitzvah. So he had like $1,000, which was like an untold fortune. And he said, I'm coming with you. I said, I'm running away. And he said, I am too. I'm coming with you. And I'm bringing my bar mitzvah money. So off we went. We hitchhiked. And we took a train to Wisconsin, and then we hitchhiked on our way to Canada I didn't have my bar mitzvah, so I must have been 12. And we narrowly escaped getting killed. We honestly did. We hitchhiked in Wisconsin to get to Milwaukee, and we got picked up by somebody, probably a kid about 19 or 20. And he went a distance, and then he stopped the car and pulled out a great big razor. And I was so dumb, I looked at the razor and I said, wow, I bet that's sharp. And he, put his thumb on the edge of it. And he said, yeah, it's really sharp. My friend was a lot smarter and hipper than I would. He says, well, we're just going to see our grandmother, and there's her house. And he said, we opened the door and he said, come on. And I got out and he said, run. And so we ran to this farmhouse. And the guy did not follow us. But about a month later, it turned out there was a man, I think his name was Starkweather, I may have that wrong, who was killing children and hanging them up like poultry, like meat in his farmhouse in that part of Wisconsin. So I don't know for sure it was the same guy, but that's what happened. But eventually, by hook or by crook, we got to Milwaukee, and the guy didn't follow us. Nothing else like that has ever happened. But
did you ever look him up to see if it was the guy?
Well, it was in all the papers. The question is whether I could recognize whether that was his face. And to tell you the truth, I wasn't sure. So he fit the description, but I don't want to say anything I don't know to be true. So, right. But anyway, we got to Milwaukee, went to a lot of movies in a row. And then we decided we'd have to get a job if we were going to do this. So we went down to the shipyard in Milwaukee on the Great Lake, on the Lake Michigan. And, we wanted to go to Canada too. So we said, anybody going to Canada? And they said, no. We said, but there is a place you go to, and they gave me directions to a place. And he said, do you see how to get there? And we were pretty little kids. And I repeated to him his directions. He said, wow, you remembered it all. I said, yeah. And he said, do you want a job? He wanted me to be the cabin boy on he took iron ore from somewhere in Wisconsin over to Michigan some iron ore ship. And he was the captain and he needed a cabin boy, I guess. And I was ready to do that when my friend said, let's go see a movie. We went to see a movie. And my friend chickened out. He said, I can't do this. I'm going back to Chicago. I miss my mother. Frankly, I was hell-bent on getting out of town and going to live in my own life. But when my friend Ricky turned around, I turned around too. And by the time I got home, I recognized what I had done. And my mother was white as a sheet, and private detectives were milling about and so on. And I deeply apologized to her and all. I think she did eventually. She was a very nice, loving woman. So I don't think she held it against me, but she was awfully glad to see me. And it was a big event. I sort of, even though I didn't go to Canada, I saw that I'm an independent being in a way that a lot of kids, I think, do not. Did
Wow.
well in high school, did well in college, fell in love in college. And my girlfriend, who is now my wife, said, you want to be a doctor? It's such a greasy, grindy life. Don't do that. Do something more interesting. She was very bohemian. So I studied something else that I really was interested in, which is foundations of mathematics and philosophy. And I studied it. And after I graduated, I was a TA at Berkeley for a year, and I got a scholarship to Oxford in England. So I went to England, and they loved me, to speak frankly. It was 1963. The war had only been over a mere 18 years, and we were still regarded as really good guys, we Americans. The British they had this class system. I'm not sure it's as rigid now as it was back then, but it was rigid. And we weren't in it. So people were free to be friendly with us and tell us what they really thought and so on. And I broke up with the girlfriend from high school, even though I was eventually from college, even though I was eventually going to marry her, we broke up. And I got a couple of other serious relationships at Oxford, and which I don't feel I should talk about.
That's okay.
They're very interesting.
Well, mum's the word.
Things that happened there. And then my great professor, Gilbert Ryle, Sir Gilbert, is a very well-regarded philosopher who must have passed away by now. He was the chairman of the best world journal in philosophy called Mind. He and I were famous friends. We really got along extremely well. He was very big and bald, and I'm very short, and I was quite hairy at the time, having been in California for a year as a TA, and a hippie type or beatnik, I don't know, something like that. When I was done, he said, I said, what should I do? He said, well, you have a choice. You can either teach philosophy until your students overtake you, or you can go somewhere and think, maybe join the Merchant Marines, be a farmer. And I didn't need to do either of those. I had a small trust fund, a small one. And so I didn't know what to do. I was in the great bookstore there at Basil Blackwell on the Broad Street. I came across a book by Patanjali, who happened to be the first grammarian, as well as the first one to write about yoga, and a doctor. And I was studying the foundations of mathematics at the time. I was trying to figure out, where did mathematics come from? What only people do it. What is this thing? It's so important in our lives, and we don't share it with anything but ourselves. What is it? Oxen turn mills, and dogs patrol our homes at night, but mathematics, we don't share it at all. After thinking about it for a while, I thought that the roots of mathematics might be in grammar, since nothing but creatures who speak use it, who use language, and that the grammar has, rules about a subject and what's a well-made sentence, and mathematics, what's a well-made formula, and so on. And it seemed to me a compelling analogy. And I realized that Patanjali was both, he was the first grammarian. And so I went to India to learn Sanskrit, to become a Sanskrit scholar. I was there about 3 weeks. I realized I was never going to learn Hindi or Sanskrit as well as the average Indian 3-year-old. So I decided to go around India anyway and just look for liberated people. And of them, there were plenty. Some were trying to fool me, some were trying to fool themselves, but many were actually a genuine article. And along that way, my girlfriend at the time, no, I'm missing a piece of the story. On the streets of Bombay, they still called me Doc. Many people, I didn't know why, but they called me Doc. So on the street of Bombay, there was an English drug addict sitting on the sidewalk, and I knew him. His name was Saltonstall. I doubt he's around now. And he said, "Hey, Doc, you got to see this book." And he handed me Mr. Iyengar's book. And I looked at it, and my girlfriend looked at it. And after I did every pose I could do in the book, every morning and every night, it just was head and shoulders above anything I'd ever seen in the way of yoga. It wasn't very many poses I could do, but what I did that. And then my girlfriend said to me, "Hey, he's only a couple of 100 miles away." So it took us about a week to get ready, and we bundled everything up and we went to see him. He wasn't there, but his daughter said he would be back in a week. So we took a room and took the roof of a hotel for the vast sum of $1 a day, I think. Beautiful gardens and everything. When a week went by, and I knocked on his door and came to the door, he said, "Why are you here?" I said, "I want to learn your yoga." And he challenged me. He said, "Why do you want to learn my yoga?" I said, "I want to heal." I hadn't thought about that, but those words just came out of my mouth. And he said, "You want to heal?" Like a third challenge. I said, "Yes." And he said, "Come on in. That's my great thing." And it was a really good electric meeting, that we had. And I just took, he was very generous. Every class he gave, he invited me to, and I took, whether it were a single, one-on-one private lesson, or a small group, or his large classes that he did in Mumbai every weekend. There's a church that gave him a large room with many chairs. I think that's where the chair version of Iyengar yoga. And he used those chairs in ingenious and always sensible ways, intuitively balanced ways. I stayed about a year. I just kept the hotel room and stayed. And he had a sort of a small community around him. I wouldn't call them expatriates because they weren't leaving the country. They were actively coming to see him. And there was a dancer from South Africa. And maybe it's time for a short adventure. There was one woman, another dancer from Britain, who came one day shedding tears. And, "Well, what's wrong?" He said, "Well, I broke my leg. My dance career is over." And this is to give you a flavor of what his community was like. Father Lobo, who was a bit stout, he was a Jesuit from Spain, and his yoga wasn't that good. He was an excellent teacher, truly excellent teacher. He said to her, "How many hours a day do you practice yoga? Do you practice dance?" And she said, 5. And he said, "Well, for a while, you won't be able to actually do the dance. But what I suggest is that you take the same 5 hours and imagine that you are dancing. Feel your hair hit the side of your cheek. Feel the wind whiz by your brow and the room spin. Go through what you do now in your mind every day." Long story short, it took about 9 months for her to return. And she came back and she was ebullient. She was glowing like a hot coal. "Now, what's going on?" She said, "They took the cast off." And somebody asked, "Can you dance?" And she smiled, one of those smiles. And she said, "Not only can I dance, I'm better." It just shows you how much of what you do of your movement is in your mind.
Absolutely.
So stayed a year. And when I left, I gave a party for this community. I had a vision after the party. I saw Mr. Iyengar, and I saw through his flesh to his bones. And it was not grisly at all. It wasn't a scary picture. It was his bones were like glistening, though. And it took me, then I went back to America, went to medical school, taught first at Einstein, now at Columbia, published 100 papers on various subjects, and then we're on yoga. And it took me about 25 years to realize that vision and say, maybe yoga will really reverse osteoporosis. I told some of my friends, and they said, "You're crazy. You're going to break their bones." And I said, "Maybe you're right." And so I did a pilot study in my office every Tuesday. After I was done seeing my patients, 5:30, I would spend an hour with patients teaching them yoga that I thought would be good for osteoporosis. But I had in my practice at the time 200 patients with osteoporosis. So I divided them into 2 groups. 100 I didn't do anything with. I just watched them for 2 years, got a DEXA scan, got the bone density scan on all 200. But the other 100, I invited to come to my class every Tuesday night, 5:30 to 6:30. And many did. And I gave them yoga. And then at the end of 2 years, everybody got another DEXA scan, the ones that didn't do the yoga and the ones that did the yoga. And I remember looking over the data one night, and one of my kids looked over and said, Dad, what are you doing? And I said, I'm looking over a study I just did. And he said, are you going to publish it? And I said, oh, it's just a pilot study. I just want to see who got hurt. Turns out nobody got hurt. He said, give me the data. So I gave him emailed it to him. He went upstairs and looked at the data. He came down 5 minutes later and said, Dad, it's significant. The difference between the two. So I did publish it. I got fire in my belly and I decided to do a big study. So I made 1,000 copies of a disc where the poses, I just thought they would be good for the spine, for the hip, and for the femur, the 3 sites that are measured by the DEXA scan. I had to do something that was measured. How else was I going to find out if it worked or not? And I did something that I really regarded as extremely dumb, but I did it. I advertised it. Mr. Iyengar came to New York for his last time. They had like a libretto that they gave out, with various things about him and his history and all that. And they sold some ads in it, and I bought the back page. And on the back page, I advertised free yoga for osteoporosis. You must get a DEXA scan, and then I will give you this disc. And I just gave out the discs for free, 1,000 discs, and not a big expenditure, followed them. And after 2 years, I would call them up, or after a year and a half, I would call them and say, you're almost going to get another DEXA scan. Are you doing the yoga? And it turned out that, I think some people tell you what you want to hear, and they said they were doing it and they weren't, but there were 241 people out of the ones I sent it out to who actually said they were doing the yoga at least every other day. At least I said 4 times a week. And those people, I sent it up to the head of biostatistics up at Harvard, who happened to have been a patient of mine for years. And I taught him yoga, and he changed. I don't mention any names, but he was just like one of those guys you see him put together with a glue, very skinny.
Yes.
And then I saw him, I didn't see him for 10 years or so. And he came back to see me for, it was back hurt. And I said, you doing yoga? He said, yeah, I'm doing it very often. And he was, I don't know if it's every day, but it was close to that. He was filled out. He was smiling. He was walking like a regular chap, and he was married and had a couple of kids, and everything was, instead of this lonely life that I at least imagined he was leading when we met. He took a look at the data and sent it to one of his graduate students, and then they figured it out. Turned out it's true. It really worked. The pilot studies results were replicated. And I had a wonderful woman working with me who was a postdoc at Rockefeller, who just wanted to learn some yoga or something. So she worked with me. And she really did a lot of the statistical preparation, but that really worked. And so I've been teaching that ever since. I now have 500 teachers in the US and about 12 countries who are teaching this yoga. And I see that I get letters every day. I get some letters from somebody saying, thank you. I reversed my osteoporosis without taking those horrible medicines. And it feels really good. And then about 20 years ago, I had a patient, a little bird of a woman. She was an administrator up in a hospital in Connecticut. And her daughter, who was a yoga teacher, brought her in. And she said, my mom has terrible scoliosis. She's dying of scoliosis. She had 108 degrees of curve, more than 90 degrees. And her heart could not fill with blood because there was not enough room for it. And the lungs were compressed. She couldn't breathe. So you'd think surgery would be the perfect thing, but she couldn't tolerate surgery. She would die. So I said, we'll try some yoga. And I can't promise it'll do anything. Maybe it'll slow down the progression. Who knows? Maybe we can even stop it. And about 5 months later, I looked at her. She came every month with her daughter. And I said, maybe I'm kidding myself, but I think you look better. So we went and got another x-ray. And in a very short time, I'm not sure it was 5 months. I don't remember, but in a short time, she had gone from 108 degrees to 68 degrees, a 40-degree improvement. I was walking on top of the world, and so was she. Now, the secret and she went on, she was my patient until last year. She passed away at 93 or something. No, more than that, 97, something like that. But the secret weapon in this was the daughter, because the daughter was nagging her mother. The daughter was a yoga teacher, and she believed in yoga. She said, Mom, you didn't do your yoga today. And that's what made the difference, I think. So this is where both times with the osteoporosis and the scoliosis, my dumbness comes through in bold, because about a week after I put this on the libretto in the Iyengar meeting, I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, Dr. Fishman, you're not very smart. You advertised for people to do yoga to get better from osteoporosis who are Iyengar people. They're already doing yoga and they have osteoporosis. So that's not very much. But I said, I got them in the study. They want to get better. I'm going to try anyway. And it turns out they did get better. And the scoliosis the same way. I treated this woman. She got better. It didn't occur to me that this would be of general interest. It didn't occur till my neighbor came down and told me that her sister had scoliosis. Did I know anything? So I treated the sister got better, and it was the neighbor who's a Yale graduate, an MBA, a smart woman. She looked at me and she said, you ought to let people know about this.
Yes.
It's her idea. And so I did. I started treating people with it. I let it be known to my colleagues. It really does work. I've published it 3 times. I got one in the hopper, and I'm actually doing a piece of research right now that's funded. Much of my research I have funded. I was at Einstein, and as a teacher, I was a low-level teacher and professor, lowest grader professor. And I applied for grants, and I think I got one, spending my whole life applying for grants. And then when you get the grant, then the first thing you do is start working on the next grant. It's like a business.
Yeah.
And I didn't want it, so I quit. And I went out and I said, I'm going to make my own money, and I'm going to spend my own money on my own grants, doing my own research. And that's what I've done ever since. Now I'm at the point where I need their money because I need to do bigger studies. The government is not, the medical community is not impressed with a study of 100 people. You need 1,000, 10,000. Then they're going to look up at you and say, oh, maybe he's got something there. Now I'm applying, now I'm back doing that. But in my position now, it doesn't take so long, and it's a lot easier, and a lot more successful. This grant is for 14 to 18-year-olds, where most scoliosis is like that now, because since the advent of antibiotics to really lay tuberculosis low, at least in this kind of Ethiopia, it's still a big deal, but here it's almost gone. So people don't get that POTS disease that affects their spines. It's scoliosis, as they do in Ethiopia. And the Salk vaccine basically vanquished polio, so you don't get it from that. So apart from cerebral palsy and some unusual diseases like osteogenesis imperfecta, all the cases of scoliosis are young people, and it's called adolescent idiopathic scoliosis, which is the doctor's way of disguising the fact that we don't know what it's caused by. But I believe I do know what it's caused by. I believe it's caused by muscular imbalance, that one side is stronger than the other. It just, if you took a rural drive and you saw a radio antenna, the cables on this side were stronger. The cable would bend that way. But we're not radio towers. We're people, and we have ribs. And when the spine curves, the ribs splay out like a section of a wheel. The ribs like spokes of a wheel. And then they spread the soft tissue, the muscles, the skin, and then they migrate into the space created by their separation. So they migrate back. So there's a lump on the convex side, always. It's always on the convex side, if it's there, and it's often there. And people for hundreds, maybe thousands of years have supposed that because that side is bigger, it's hard because the skin is stretched tight as a drum. But like a drum, it's hollow. Ain't nothing in there. Rather, it's the other side is the strong side. So all we do with the yoga is we strengthen that convex side and bring it up. Now, this current, and it works beautifully. We do the yoga on the strengthen the weak side. We also do small botulinum injections to weaken the strong side. So we have one case about 6 weeks ago. Little boy got 27 degrees better in 3 weeks. I mean, that's like surgery, but without the nuts and bolts and without the cutting and without the subsequent disability, wonderful. We'll see what comes to pass. I do not have enough patience for this study yet. If anybody in your audience or you know a teenager who has scoliosis, it's free. We pay for the x-rays. It's a placebo study, but I went back to him because some people wouldn't enter the study because their darling daughters and sons were going to be placebos. And they actually said to me, I'll take the botulinum toxin, but I won't be in the study. I said, well, but then you're going to have to pay a lot of money for the botulinum toxin. They said, that's okay. And they paid, sometimes not rich people, paying, $1,000, $1,500 for the botulinum toxin, rather than put them in the study where their child might be a placebo. So I went back to the drug company and I said, what I just told you, and I said, make it a crossover study so that even if they are placebo, in 3 months, they'll get the real medicine. And it was very tough, but they wisely agreed. And now we're getting some patients. Nobody wanted to subject.
Really?
It's strange. We care more about our children than we do about ourselves. People very willingly enter into these things themselves, but not for their kids. Along the way, I've applied yoga. I mean, if there's anything noteworthy about me, it is that I've brought yoga into medicine in a meaningful way. I don't say in a big way because, there are 9 million people in the United States with scoliosis. I've treated maybe 500, 0.005%, they're just, I'm not making much of a dent in the medical establishment at this point. The other one that I did do an NIH study for is the rotator cuff. This one, I was the first patient. I was driving down 6th Avenue, 7th Avenue, and I had just taken an antibiotic, and it turns out it's one of those antibiotics that weakens your tendons. And my whole family's in the backseat, 3 kids in the backseat, my wife next to me, and the taxi cuts me off. And I pulled the wheel as hard as I could. And I avoided the accident, but I tore my rotator cuff in a terrible way. Not a major tear, what they call a massive tear. Got the MRI. It didn't hurt at all. It was so massive. It's like a 3rd-degree burn. It doesn't hurt at all. I couldn't lift my arm to save my soul. We were going downtown to visit some friends, and since I was in no pain, we visited the friends anyway. And on the way uptown, everybody else got a cappuccino, and I wrote myself a prescription, got an MRI, and I could see then that it was a massive tear. Went back to the person that had done my right arm after a tiny ski accident a couple of years before. He took one look at it and he said, I can't do this. You have to go to the real experts. And it was Louis Bigliani, who was the head of the American Elbow and Shoulder Association, a surgeon, and his star pupil, Evan Flatow. And I made an appointment with both of them. Even though I'm a doctor and so on, I had to wait close to a month to see them. So in the meantime, I'm doing my tests, I'm taking the other arm to hold that arm up. I was doing okay, but I couldn't do yoga, I thought. I missed standing on my head. So one day, I do yoga very early in the morning. When you have kids, you're doing yoga, you must do the yoga before the kids wake up. Otherwise, all bets are off. So you must get up an hour and a half earlier than everybody else. I'm still doing it, but I was doing it then, and I was set up the chair so it would be safe and everything. I stood on my head. My wife came downstairs. She took one look at me and she said, like Bert and Ernie, she said, Loren, what are you doing? And I was all ready to get up and feel sheepish about this and apologize when I said, you know what? I can raise my arm. I don't know what made me think so, but I just tried it and I did it. And now I knew I hadn't healed a massive rotator cuff with 3 minutes or whatever on my head. So I took my yoga duds to work with me that day to my office, and I stood on my head and I had a physical therapist stick little pins into the muscles of my back to see and my shoulder to see what was going on. And I figured it out. And then afterwards at a convention, I asked somebody to loan me an 8-channel EMG, which is not currently used, an big, expensive device, somebody out of Cleveland. And they were kind enough to give me the device so I could monitor each of the muscles involved while I was standing on my head, while I had the rotator cuff. And it turns out what I was thinking was right. I'll tell you about it in a minute if you want to know. But in the meantime, I kept my appointments with both doctors. And I went to see them, and they both went through a number of questions, and they would say, well, Dr. Fishman, what can you do now? And I would raise my arm. And they gasped. The residents were all around looking at it, the fellows, and saying, no, we'll cut this, and then we'll sew this, and then we'll cut that, they're figuring out what they're going to do. And they're going, oh my God, look at this. When I raised my arm like that, Dr. Bigliani, an authoritative and humane man, came forward and he said, you don't need surgery. You're not going to do as well after surgery as you're doing now. And I said, well, how do you, and I told them my theory of how it worked. And they looked at me, they both, as with one voice, they said, we don't know. We don't understand the shoulder that well. So if ever a gauntlet were handed down, that was it. So I made it my business to study a lot of people just on my own. And it turns out by standing on your head, you activate a muscle that pulls the head of the shoulder muscle down. And so when you go like this, it pulls down. So it's like a cantilever bridge. It pulls down and the bridge goes up. It's like that. A very simple, beautiful mechanism. Frank Lloyd Wright used it all the time. But anyway, I did this study of 200 people. COVID just cut it short at 197. When they decided in March of 2020, I said, okay, the study's off. I'm going to calculate the data and all that. Sent it back to the same fellow up at Harvard who took a look at it, found it did prove that this maneuver does work. Well, again, there were controls and stuff. What we were really doing in that meeting, in this study, was something that came out of a non-drunken New Year's Eve, where I had dinner with a friend of my wife's actually, and her husband. And her husband and I, who's at Carnegie Mellon, a computer guy and a psychologist, we cooked up together that we wanted to find out whether the face registered pain, so we could find an objective measure for pain. So I said, well, I've got this maneuver. These people are in terrible pain when they start. And then a minute later, after I show them this triangular forearm support maneuver, they're in no pain. So we have a perfect control and intervention, and we can video. This was basically the rest of it. He figured out, easily. He'd video the faces before and after, and they would rate their pain before and after. I would rate their pain before and after, and they will show the video to ordinary people, and they will rate the pain before and after, and we will come up with feed it then into AI, come up with an algorithm that will determine an objective scale for pain. And once we have that, it will help doctors to decide who really needs these opioids and who doesn't.
Based on the facial maneuvers.
Yeah, facial recognition.
Right.
I mean, it turns out it's very good at telling who's faking. Corners of the mouth, corners of the eyes, you really can tell. And below about 5 out of 10 on a scale of 10, 5 being where the pain enters your consciousness. The pain cannot be just put off with distraction. I would call that 5 out of 10, where it disturbs your concentration. And then it goes up from there. I think above that, there is an involuntary element that you cannot suppress. I suppose you could learn to suppress it the way dogs learn to salivate with a bell. You could teach yourself that, but people have not taught themselves that. So you really can get an objective sense of it, sort of like your heart rate goes up when you run, or when somebody tells you something thrilling. So it's like that. So that's the study. We haven't really worked every detail out. The COVID really interfered. We couldn't get groups of students together to say what they thought this pain level was. But now we're working with an Algerian woman to do that. Those are the big 3. I've also found really good cures for restless leg syndrome. I mean, I really have it. One of my first patients was a Vietnam pilot who had 0 insight. 0. And this is a talking cure. It's not a physical thing you do. I give them a short talk about the nature of desire, and then they do things with themselves with their restless leg syndrome. And in a matter of sometimes minutes, sometimes takes a week or 2, it's gone.
Would you go through that?
You want me to go through it with you?
Would you go through it?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's desire like? What is the nature of it? Well, if you think about it and think back in your own history, it's something that comes in waves. It comes and then it gets stronger and then it gets stronger. And if you've ever had the curiosity to see what would happen next and you wait it out a little bit, then it gets weaker and it gets weaker and it's gone. So I say to him, restless leg syndrome is you're lying there, usually in bed. Usually it's your legs, could be your arms, almost always it's your legs. And you feel a kind of vibration, a kind of zizzing, a buzzing of something like that. And you move your leg. And the minute you move your leg, it stops. But 10, 15 seconds later, it's back. And you go through the same second. Hours of your night go by like this. So what I say to him is not when you first feel the buzzing and the zizzing, try to resist it just a little and watch what happens. It's a wave and it'll stop. And then another wave that comes that'll be stronger. Don't be a hero, give into it. But then when you have a chance, when you feel like you're ready to do it, tough it out for the first one and tough it out for the second one. What's going to happen next? Well, let me just tell you what's going to happen next. At least one more time. You're going to feel it again. And again, don't be a hero, give in. But then maybe a couple of days or weeks or even zizzes later, you're going to be able to resist that one too. And pretty soon, if you resist it 3 or 4 times, you'll find the next wave is easier to resist because it's smaller. And the next one, easier still. And maybe a couple more and then it's gone. And the interesting thing is once you do that, it doesn't come back. Not tomorrow, not next week, not next year. I mean, there are a couple of cases where it has come back, but the vast majority, it's gone. So I told this to this Vietnam pilot who was, let me tell you how much of a type A he was. He took with him in his flights over the South China Sea a little capsule of cyanide because he was so scared of sharks. He wasn't scared of being captured by the enemy. He was scared of sharks. And so if he got shot down over the South China Sea where there are all those sharks, if he saw a tail, he was going to take the cyanide. And, this a very romantic sort of guy. a very romantic wife, very romantic story for the two of them. But that's who he is and was. And I taught him this. He came back to see me the next week and he said, "You're a blank, blank ingenious." And we've also got cures for insomnia that don't always work, but they work a good deal more than 50% of the time, maybe up to 70% of the time. Yoga, you can do it all in bed. Takes about 5 minutes.
What do you think is the percentage of the mind and what's the body? It's the mind-body connection, but what?
I think it changes I once read a quote by Albert Einstein that I'm thinking of right now, where he said, "You don't just think with your brain, you think with your hands and with your hips." And that's what I'm feeling about this. I don't know if I don't know how much yoga you do or if you do it, but
I do a lot of yoga.
Doing yoga, sometimes things flash before your mind that you didn't even know that you remembered. And that's your body. You could say your body is thinking for you, or you could also say your whole nervous system is recalling something.
Yeah, I think of it. I had an experience with yoga once where I used to be quite advanced. And as I've gotten older, as you know, I have scoliosis. So doing some of the poses that I used to do when I was younger, I'm not doing those now, but I was trying to do dancer pose. And I got into full dancer pose with my arms behind, my leg up. And I thought I had an epiphany in that moment. I could always do this. This was always a part of me. It's just right now that I was able to bring it into the physical. Yeah. And that was like, a mind-blowing moment, because that is a metaphor for so many things in life. I mean, yoga is life, but you said yoga is becoming less esoteric and more common sense.
I think, words like mumbo jumbo and that sort of thing you hear it much less than you did. I mean, when I went to a conference 10 years ago, the IAYT, it's a fledgling organization, had conferences every year in LA, and I would go out there and support them and give a talk. It was very interesting. I gave a talk and said, here's the medical evidence. And people came up to me afterwards and said, "Yeah, that's what you say, but that's not what my guru says." And I would say to them, you can have a guru for two reasons. Either you want the truth or you want a daddy. If you want a daddy, go with what your guru says. He's your daddy and he's going to do right by you, I hope. But if you want the truth, then you have to pay attention to what evidence the guru has for what he or she says. And I felt I was, sticking up for the truth in a brave and straightforward way. But now, in the last 10 years or so, you don't have to do that anymore. It's obvious. If you look at the number of academic papers on medical subjects in yoga, it's absolutely exponential. It went from 2 to 4, and now it's going from 64 to 128. It's really going up fast. And these studies are meaningful. They're doing them at Harvard. They're doing it at Johns Hopkins, all over the place, Stanford. I just read a paper last week in Nature Medicine, University of Oregon, where they proved with very sophisticated mechanisms and statistics that abdominal breathing changes the cerebrospinal fluid in a way that no other kind of breathing does. What this showed is that it makes waves in the cerebrospinal fluid that nothing else. Waves surely bathes different parts of the cerebral tissue. It's a very interesting thing to do.
That's fascinating. We don't know what we don't know.
That's right. 80% of the universe is dark matter. Sometimes I think that's just an apologetic that physicists are making when they
just don't know.
We are critters that have survived because of the kinds of perceptions we have, and by honing those perceptions, we've survived better and better and better. But that doesn't mean it's the only way to survive. There may be another way that takes into account not just 20% of reality, but let's say 52% of reality that is totally foreign to us. And if there are beings that do that, we don't even know they're here. And that, they're sort of functioning in a different sphere. They're not really. They exist just the way we do. We share the universe, but we don't share any perceptions at all. So I think we don't know what we don't know. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for about 100,000 years and see what comes to pass.
I'm going back to thinking about what you said about when you were little and how you always had a sense of this wisdom, like you always knew beyond your years. What do you think that is all about? Where do you think that comes from?
Well, I don't know. I think the stock answer would be intelligence, that somehow I got smarter younger than most people do. My myelin inside my brain found I got more signals more clearly earlier. That's, I think, the easiest answer. I do have I have a lot of very intelligent people in my family. One of my cousins won 2 Nobel Prizes. I do. It is an intelligent family. There's no doubt about it. My father was a very bright man. He was one of the smartest things about him are the things he didn't say. Like a Japanese painting where there are the lines, and then a Japanese drawing. There are the lines, and then the lines define the place where there are no lines, the space between. That's the way I feel about him.
The liminal space.
But the other explanation is there are other explanations. One is that, the way some people are born in a boy's body and they're girls, and vice versa, and all kinds of comment. I might have just been born in a young body and been quite old. Why? Were my neurons that old? No, they were gestating and formed from the sperm and the egg, like everybody's. It might have formed a creature that just got old really quick.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at 3, I was already thinking about memories. So I remember on my 60th birthday, I said, now I feel I'm my own age. This was not my first birthday. This is the first one where I am the age I claim. And one of my friends said, that's not true. You're just the age you think you are.
Mm.
So I don't know what to make of that either. He was a very smart guy. And so hard to know. But the best I can do with it is to think that I was just more mature.
Okay.
I was just able to size up the situation for whatever reason. That's what it was.
Was it because your parents you had an atmosphere in your family where thinking was something that was prioritized, or that you?
My father was a lawyer, and he was a kind of lawyer that had to think things over. He didn't just say, well, there's a statute here. He wasn't that kind of lawyer, and he wasn't that kind of man. And my mother was just she was beautiful, and she was very smart. And on the moment, in her whole life, I never saw her embarrassed. It didn't happen.
She just took things for what they were.
Or she had an answer.
Okay. And what was the most important thing you learned from your parents?
I think I have to say there are a couple. One of them is curiosity, which I got from my mother. What is that? How does that work? I wonder how that happened. We would delve into things. And the other is from my father, was a sense, I can sum it up in something he said to me once. He said, Loren, be man enough to change your mind. In other words, the manly thing isn't to stand your ground and say, well, I insist. Not like that. The manly thing to do, the human manly thing to do, is to think it over and decide whether you're right or not. And if you're not, to be man enough to say it. I'm not right.
You must be high in open-mindedness. Have you ever taken it?
I don't always do it, I'm afraid, but I certainly try, yeah.
So would you consider yourself to be an iconoclast in what you're doing with yoga?
Yeah, I mean, now I'm in the unfortunate position of being somebody who rebelled against something that now everybody rebels against. So well,
that's good.
I mean, I guess this happens to true leaders who lead their, the intellectual community in a certain direction. And then the intellectual community is there. They're not leaders anymore. They're just fellow members. And that's the way I feel certainly about yoga and medicine. And my other great love all through my life has been philosophy. I really have. It's like I feel I've lost my virginity to philosophy. I really took it seriously, and it really entered into my deepest realms of.
Who's your favorite philosopher?
I think it's still Ludwig Wittgenstein, but Plato is second. Socrates and Plato, and Aristotle's third. And those are the big 3 for me. And St. Thomas also, with one line, he could dismiss, libraries full of nonsense. He was so good.
That's the tip of the iceberg theory.
Yeah.
Hemingway. I think it's very unusual for you to be so well acquainted with language, but also the mathematics side. Usually it's one or the other. People are either a math person or they're a words kind of person, but you're both.
I'm a symbolic person. A symbol. Well, it's what I mean, when I studied philosophy, I really was so serious about it. And I came to a point where I felt what I knew at that time, and what I believe I still know, frees me to go and be of some use to mankind, humankind. I can give now.
Is that your purpose?
Currently, yeah. That's all I'm going to do the best I can till I can't do anymore.
On your website, people call you a miracle worker. How does your ego reckon with that label?
Yeah, well, I love it, and I must say, I used to say to people, don't send me your patient, send me your problems. And that was it's sort of a slogan, but I have like the woman that had the scoliosis and was dying of it. I have seen a number of those. I'm sure I share that with a number of doctors who have also done this, and they pull it out of the fire. But as one doctor sent me a patient once, and I said, well, why are you sending them to me with, they have this, and this, why are you sending them to me? He said, because you always think of something.
And you're not afraid to try. You
not afraid to try within the bounds of what I consider safety,
Yeah.
I've not, knock on wood, I haven't hurt anybody as far as I know.
No.
I haven't hurt anybody very badly. I've certainly given people the wrong things to do in my life, and they do them, but no one has suffered irreparably from it.
That's beautiful.
It's lovely.
So, all right, let me ask you some big questions about purpose. So you said right now your purpose is to help as many people as you can, to just give. And so do you think that purpose changes over time for everyone? Is there one purpose that humans have? What's the philosophy of purpose?
Well, if I were to talk about myself, the person I know the best in this world, when I was starting out before medical school, my purpose was so that people would respect me, like me. And when I got to medical school, my purpose was to graduate and learn everything I could. And when I got married and had children, my purpose was to support those children and to be as good to them as I could be, which, I mean, one of my kids, my middle son has 2 grandchildren, and I'll tell you something, he is a better father than he had.
How many kids do you have?
I have 3 kids and 2 grandchildren so far. Okay. That's all. I did what I could for the kids and for my wife. I don't think I was always a good father, but that was my purpose, or a good husband. But that was my purpose. And then when the kids grew up, I look at it like they're rockets, and we launched them up. And what happens to them from then on, we can have some input, down in Dallas, they're doing a little something, but they're up there on their own. And there's not much I can do. And the more I understand that I can't do that much, the better things are.
And what do you wish for them?
Happiness and fulfillment, that they do something. I mean, what my parents used to say to me all the time was, my dad would say, be whatever you want, but whatever you are, be a good one. And I would toy with him. I'd say, okay, I'm going to be a good crook. And he would say, no, but being a crook isn't good.
Right.
And my mother would say, do something of redeeming social value. And I think I take what she says, I take what both of them say to heart. And that's just exactly the way I try to live.
Yeah.
Now, from a yogic point of view, I have to tell you, I had one lucky break. One Saturday morning when my middle son, I could just see him. He was about 4. My older son was about 9, and my younger daughter was 1. I was home alone with them one Saturday. My wife was out shopping or something. And somebody called me up on the phone, no cell phones in those days, and said, I'm in a hospital in New Jersey. I'm a friend of this friend of yours. I called her and she's told me to call you. And I had a little car accident, and now they want to give me a total hip operation. And I wonder if I need it. And so I went through it with her very carefully. And as I was going through it with her, my son is started going, Daddy, 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 and I'm just being as cautious and patient as I can be. And when I concluded was she didn't really need the surgery. And, and she didn't have it. And a year later, she called me up and she said, I think about you every day. You helped me so much. You helped me through in that hour of need, and maybe I can help you. I said, well, yeah, you helped me a lot by feeling better. That's what I was after. And she said, no. I know a prominent columnist in the New York Times. And I had just published a paper. And I said, well, maybe they're interested in this paper. Just came. It's not even out yet. They accepted it. It's coming out in 2 weeks. And sure enough, Jane, they called me up the next week. And there was a large article about it in the New York Times. That's what sort of made my practice. Phone rang off the hook, and I was busy for like 3 years with people, just going on Saturdays. I felt some people were in such pain, and there was such a long list before I would see them. So I would go in. Amongst others, I saw someone who I think was connected to organized crime. One Sunday, my office, this was just off Fifth Avenue on 83rd Street. And I looked out the window, and I saw 2 big limos stop in front of and one guy got out wearing a sharkskin suit with a big bulge here in his pocket and looking around like this. And another one got out the other door. And then finally, I think it was the second limo, guy got out wearing a Hawaiian shirt, loose and easy. Obviously, it was the boss, and came in to see me. And I've done it. Yeah, it was his shoulder, and I did what I could. And the bodyguard was right in there with him. And the boss said something, and I said, "No, it's not like that." And the bodyguard stood up and he said, "Are you saying what the boss said is wrong?" I said, "Well, I think the boss has the right idea, but I don't think what he's saying is going to help him as much as what I'm going to say right now." And so he sat down for a minute, and then I said something else, and the boss again said, "You saw this," and I said, "Well, not exactly." And then the bodyguard got up exactly the same way and said, "Are you saying the boss is wrong?" And he started to reach in here. I don't know what he was going to do. I don't think he was going to kill me for that, but it wasn't a friendly situation. And I said, "No, but there are two roads up the mountain, and they both lead to the top." And the guy, he didn't quite sit down, but he sort of got a gentler position, and he said, "Oh, I see. Like you could kill a guy with a cannon, or you could kill a guy with a gun." I said, "Yes." And then I had to give the boss a shot for something the next time he came, another Sunday. And I said, he said, "You promise you're going to get me better?" And I said, "No, but if you don't get better, it's your own fault." I must have had some Tai Chi that day. I don't know. And he said, "Okay, that sounds good." And then he came back one more time, and he was better. He did get better. I've got to help organize. You help, and all creatures, large and small.
Exactly.
You help.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, your goals change a lot over time, I think, and it's reasonable that they should, because you're fit for different things and you're faced with different challenges. Though there are those people, I think, who are sort of what they used to call inner directed. David Reisman would call inner directed. They have one goal all the time. His example was they dress up for dinner in a formal wear, even though they're living in the tropics. And you see that. If you go to some of the islands in the West Indies, you see people who are relics from a colonial past, and they're dressing up for dinner. There are our friends in jeans and sloppy looking t-shirts, and this guy's in the tux. And he's just as comfortable as you are. He's inner directed. He marches to a distant drummer. And there are people like that. There are people like that, but I think most of us are not like that. I'm certainly, apart from the two adages I gave you, whatever you do, let it be of some redeeming social value, and whatever you are, be a good one. Apart from that, I've changed a heck of a lot.
Would you say those are your two biggest lessons in life?
Oh, okay, you're asking that kind of question. I've had three really influential figures in my life, I think. Gilbert Ryle, Sir Gilbert at Oxford, who he really thought I was a great philosopher. I mean, I could mention some names of philosophers that I spoke with him about when we had lunch, and he looked at me when there was no reason for him to say this. He said, "You're a better philosopher than he is." He really had great confidence in me, and that gave me confidence too. And then Mr. Iyengar, who the last time I saw him, I was giving a talk in India in a place called Haridwar, a sacred city on the banks of the Ganges and the foothills of the Himalayas, a sacred city with streets so narrow, even a rickshaw can't get through. I mean, you have to sit like this. It's a medieval street. It's a beautiful little town where 1 million people come every year and put candles on banana leaves, and they float down the Ganges. The Ganges is about as big as the Thames there. It's not a gigantic river, big as the Seine. They're more somewhere between the two. Anyway, so I was giving this lecture. This hall is like an airplane hangar. It's gigantic, filled with people. Dish satellites being broadcast, translated into Hindi if it were English, and into English if it were Hindi. I spoke for about 10 minutes, and other speakers. It was like a get together. And I hadn't gone to see Mr. Iyengar because my wife is not into yoga. And so I just thought it would be too boring for her, and I was taking her with me, and it just didn't seem like a nice thing to do, so I didn't do it. But I felt like a cad going all the way to India. This man who has taught me so much, so pivotal in my life. I'm not even going to, but there, when I was walking down from the podium, who do you think was walking up? Mr. Iyengar. He looked at me and he said, Fisher. I said, "No, Fishman." He said, "Fishman." And I said, and he's walking, he's about to give a talk. I'm just coming down. I think people are applauding, half-heartedly. And I said to Mr. Iyengar, "If this is the last time you see me," and it was, he said, "if this is the last time, what would you say to me?" To his everlasting credit, he did not just come up with one of his innumerable quips. He thought about it for a moment, and he said, "You only rent your body," meaning your body is part of the universe. Don't mark it up. Don't abuse it, get too fat. You're just renting it. You're passing through. And so treat it like a respectful tenant. And it was a brilliant thing to say, so well put. And then the third one I've already told you about my father. I think that triumvirate, that Trinity does it for me. The Father,
Yeah.
the Son, and the Holy Ghost. I mean, another really important one was Ed DeLoggy, who was the head of what I learned to do at Albert Einstein after medical school in my graduate training. He was one of the smartest and one of the nicest men I ever met. It's just going to make me cry to think about him. What's the most important thing he ever said to me? It has nothing to do with this. It's a completely different subject. One day we were driving out to this hospital where we were going to do these EMGs, sitting next to him, and he pulled off the road and we stopped. And he said, Loren, don't think you can only love one woman. You can love two women. I made that mistake for so many years. Well, he had a mistress.
Okay. At the same time.
I don't know. Not two at a time. He meant you could actually, two at a time. You could have that kind of emotion for two people.
I think about that question a lot. That's interesting. I haven't thought about it lately, but when you look back at your life, you do have more than one great love. I mean, most people do, right? And I think I thought the number was two or three.
I think he meant that he had a wife who was a lovely person and a lover who was a divorced woman of about 40. I never met her, but everybody knew about her. I think that's what he meant. But I'm a totally faithful husband. I'm not saying that at all. But it's in your life, it means that you can have great affection for more than one person at a time. You can love this one and simultaneously have tremendous admiration and adore somebody else too.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't think just because you adore this other one that you don't love the first one. You do.
Yeah, because we don't want to put those kind of constraints on our heart.
Yeah, exactly. You want the love to make you free, not
exactly
down.
Yeah. In terms of things that you're most grateful for in your life, you've had some extraordinary experiences. So what would you say are your biggest blessings from your life?
Well, being rather intelligent helps, but I've been very lucky too. I didn't tell you about this one. I was in India, living on a beach in Goa, and basically in a nice little house right on the beach. Probably the Portuguese had built it many years before. One of my friends was an American, but of Indian descent, was playing with a little boy in the ocean very close by. They're just fooling around. And all of a sudden he called out, sort of in a conversational tone, help, help. It was late spring, like early summer, May or June. And there's a large monsoon in that neck of the woods. And I was a very powerful swimmer at the time. I swam out smiling. And he said, I can't handle this. And I looked at the boy and I recognized the boy. I had seen him in Bombay where he had stood up to some Westerners who were trying to make fun of him and put him down. So he was a fat little, very black kid, probably in their untouchable scheme of things.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, but anyway, I did. He was out sort of in deep water, so he said, bring him in. So I did the classical Red Cross, save the life stuff. And then I looked back at the beach and I realized we were caught in a riptide and we were out there, we were several blocks from the shore at least. I mean, I don't know how many blocks, but it was really far. And I remembered reading in the paper last week that many people had drowned in that river. They were all brought downstream toward the mouth of another river, about 5 miles downstream. And I could feel that we were headed that way. And I said, oh, that's how they die. And then I kept trying and I looked back again and we were appreciably further from the shore. And the little boy recognized it too and started to cry and started, as they always do, grabbed me, tried to push me down so he could come up. I came up and I slapped him. I said, you listen to me. And he started to cry and the tears ran down his face. It was like, his face was like porous. It was like rubber. And it gave me an idea that I had seen these flying fish that leap up, they slap on the deck when you're taking the boat back to Bombay. I remember this thing from high school chemistry called laminar flow, which is that any body of water or air, the current will be stronger the more you are towards its center, and it'll be weaker if you're more peripheral. And so the boy got stiff like a little surfboard, and that was what occurred to me. And his head was up, thank God, like this. So here's what I did. I would wait for a wave to come. They weren't breaking, they were just swells. And I would push him with the swell of the wave. And then I would swim to catch up with him. By the time I caught up with him, he was already coming back towards me. But I kept us both really high, so our feet weren't down where the current was stronger. And I didn't even look up. I swam and I pushed and I pushed and I swam for a good hour and a half. I probably swallowed half of the Arabian Gulf. And then I looked up and I was scared to look up. I looked up, and sure enough, we were a lot closer. So I took heart, brought him to the rest of that. By the time we got to the shore, I was too weak. He was a fat little kid. I couldn't pick him up. But luckily, the man who had called to me near Mall, who had called to me in the first place, was there, and he came and picked the boy up and brought him to the shore. He was fine. The kid was fine. I was sick for a week. But the thing that's important about it to me, I didn't realize till much later, was that in the course of this whole thing, it never occurred to me to let the boy die. It didn't cross my, I'm coming in. And that didn't, so that there may be some basic thing about me in there. And when, I was going down with the ship.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's when I think about my impressions of you is that you're a healer. You're a healer. And I don't mean that in a cliche kind of way. I think we overuse that phrase a bit these days, but you're just truly a healer. And there's something ancient about that.
I feel that myself sometimes. One of my first memories, I didn't realize that till right now, but my earliest memories, we had a country house in Michigan on the eastern shores of Lake Michigan, and driftwood would flop in. And one day after a storm, a gigantic flat piece of driftwood, like a pillar of a pier or something, was there. And I took a stone and I took another stone and I broke the one stone with the other. And I looked what was inside, and it was interesting. It wasn't just a stone. It was like something inside, another stone in there. And I showed it to a couple of my little friends. And pretty soon, it's just like an archetypal memory. Pretty soon, there were 7 or 8 kids running around the beach, bringing stones over to me for me to chop and break open. Figure out and explain to them what was going on, in my 5-year-old vocabulary. And then it occurred to me, why are they bringing it to me? Why don't they break the stones open themselves? What do they need? But I saw that they were bringing me their problems. They wanted me to explain it to them. And that for some reason, that resonates deeply with me.
Yeah, I think that says something pretty profound about your identity and maybe what you're here, who you're here to be, or what you're here to do.
It's like the doctors and the yogis sending me these patients.
Right.
It's just, except I'm not breaking anybody open, I hope.
No, not in that way. But you are turning it over to them like you wanted to do with those kids almost, that they have to do the work. And
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I love that, man. Well,
How much do you charge for these sessions?
I'm just so grateful that you've spent all this time with me, because I know how valuable your time is, and I just I'm beyond grateful, really, because my God, the stories alone are they're just gold. There's so much treasure in this conversation we've just had. I'm going to be unpacking this for a long time.
Thank you.
And I know people are just going to love to hear this. I know that my spine is moving into place because of you and your teachings. So I'm just so grateful. I'm grateful that you're here, Dr. Fishman. You're a person who's adding so much value to the world.
Well, you're very charming yourself. Really very nice to talk to you.
Well, I honestly just can't thank you enough for all this time that you've given to me.